While I was at work, my wife's mother moved my kids' stuff to the basement, claiming, "Our granddaughter deserves the best rooms." When I got home and saw my kids crying, I just smiled and said, "Pack your bags." My in-laws had no idea what was coming. You know how some moments just slap you right across the face when you least expect it? That's exactly what happened to me on what I thought was going to be just another boring Tuesday at Morrison & Associates Architecture. I was deep in the zone, fine-tuning some blueprints for this fancy downtown condo project, when my phone started buzzing like crazy on my desk. At first, I figured it was probably just another spam call, or maybe one of those annoying robo-texts about my car's extended warranty, so I didn't even bother looking up from my computer screen. But then it buzzed again, and again, that persistent little vibration that makes you think maybe somebody actually needs you for something important. So I finally picked up the damn thing, and when I saw Ava's name on the screen, my heart did this weird little skip. My 13-year-old daughter doesn't usually text me during school hours unless something's seriously wrong. The kid's got more sense than most adults I know, and she definitely knows better than to bug me at work unless it's like life or death or something. "Dad, Grandma's moving our stuff into the basement. She says Willow deserves the good rooms." That's what the text said. Just like that. Straight to the point. No sugarcoating, no dramatic teenage nonsense. Just pure, cold facts that hit me like a freight train going full speed. I'm Jordan Price, by the way. 38 years old. Been working my ass off in architecture for the better part of 15 years, and I'm the father of two amazing kids who mean everything to me. Ava's my oldest at 13, smart as a whip, tough as nails, and way too mature for her age sometimes. Then there's Dylan, who's 11 and still believes the world is mostly good and fair, which breaks my heart and makes me proud at the same time. These two kids are literally the reason I get up every morning and bust my butt to make sure they have everything they need. But sitting there at my desk, staring at that text message, I realized I had absolutely no clue that while I was working late nights and weekends to provide for my family, my mother-in-law Lorraine had apparently decided that my children's bedrooms, the rooms they've been sleeping in for years, no longer belonged to them. According to Her Royal Highness, those rooms needed to be cleared out immediately for Willow, my sister-in-law Harper's 9-year-old daughter, who'd been staying with us for the past few months. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the photos Ava had sent along with that devastating text. There was her bedroom, the space we'd spent an entire weekend painting lavender because that was her favorite color at the time. The walls were completely bare now, with little torn pieces of tape still stuck where her posters used to hang. Her bookshelf, the one we built together when she was 10 and just discovering her love for fantasy novels, was completely empty. All her books, her art supplies, her journals, her entire life basically, had been stripped away and hauled off like garbage. Then came Dylan's room. His superhero posters were gone, his action figures cleared from the shelves, his baseball trophies nowhere to be seen. Everything that made those spaces theirs, everything that said, "Ava lives here and Dylan lives here," had been erased like they never existed in the first place. Like they didn't matter. Like they were just temporary guests in their own damn home. I felt this rage building up inside me, starting somewhere deep in my gut and spreading through my chest like wildfire. It wasn't the explosive, lose-your-shit kind of anger that makes you want to punch walls and scream at the top of your lungs. No, this was something much more dangerous. This was the cold, calculated kind of fury that makes you think clearly and plan carefully. The kind that makes you realize you're done playing nice, and it's time to remind people exactly who they're messing with. Without saying a word to anyone in the office, I stood up from my desk, grabbed my car keys from the little dish next to my computer monitor, and walked straight out of that building. My coworkers probably thought I'd lost my mind, leaving in the middle of the afternoon with clients to call back and deadlines to meet. But honestly, I didn't give a damn what anyone thought at that moment. My kids needed me, and everything else could wait. The drive home felt like it took forever, even though it was probably only about 15 minutes through the usual downtown traffic. My mind was racing the entire time, playing out different scenarios, imagining all the things I wanted to say to Lorraine when I got there. But on the outside, I kept it together, stayed calm, stayed focused, because I knew that losing my cool wasn't going to help my kids, and this whole mess was about them, not about me getting to vent my frustrations. That's the thing about being a parent. Sometimes you gotta swallow your pride and your anger and your immediate impulses because there's something bigger at stake. Sometimes you gotta play the long game, even when every fiber of your being wants to just explode and let everyone know exactly how you feel about their terrible decisions. But I was about to learn that staying quiet and keeping the peace wasn't always the right answer, especially when the people you're trying to keep happy are the same ones hurting your children. The first thing I saw when I pulled into our driveway was my kids sitting on the front steps like a couple of refugees who'd been kicked out of their own country. Ava had her arm wrapped around Dylan's shoulders, and even from inside my car, I could see that my little boy had been crying. His face was all red and blotchy, the way it gets when he's been trying really hard not to let the tears fall, but just can't hold them back anymore. That sight alone was enough to make me want to march straight into that house and start throwing punches, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and stay focused on what really mattered here. I parked the car and walked over to them, trying to keep my expression neutral even though I felt like I was about to explode from the inside out. "Hey guys," I said, crouching down so I was at their eye level. "You doing okay?" It was a stupid question. Obviously they weren't okay, but sometimes you gotta start somewhere, even when everything's falling apart around you. "Dad, they threw away my art project," Dylan said, his voice cracking like it does when he's trying not to cry in front of his big sister. "The one I've been working on for weeks. Grandma said it was just taking up space and threw it in the garbage." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, and I felt my heart break into about a million pieces right there on the spot. Ava, being the tough kid she is, was trying to hold it together better than her little brother, but I could see the anger burning in her eyes. She said Willow needed the bigger rooms because she's been through trauma and deserves to feel comfortable, she told me, using that matter-of-fact tone she gets when she's reporting on injustice. "But what about our trauma, Dad? What about how we feel?" That's when I looked past them and saw what they'd done to my children's belongings. Everything was stacked up in the garage like we were having some kind of twisted yard sale. Books that Ava had collected over the years were just thrown into random cardboard boxes. Dylan's Lego sets, the ones he'd spent hours carefully building and displaying, were all mixed together in plastic bags like loose change. Art supplies, school projects, stuffed animals, clothes. It was all just piled up carelessly like their lives didn't matter at all. I stood up slowly, feeling this weird calm settle over me. It's funny how sometimes when you're really, truly pissed off, you don't get loud and crazy. Instead, everything just gets crystal clear, like someone turned up the contrast on your vision, and suddenly you can see exactly what needs to happen next. That's what was happening to me right then. I wasn't seeing red anymore. I was seeing the solution. That's when I noticed Lorraine standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest like she was the queen of the castle surveying her kingdom. She had this smug little smile on her face that made me want to wipe it right off, but instead, I just looked at her and nodded like I was acknowledging her presence. Like she was worth acknowledging at all after what she'd just done to my kids. "Jordan, we've made some changes," she announced, like she was delivering some kind of royal decree that I was supposed to just accept without question. Her voice had that condescending tone that drives me absolutely crazy, the one that suggests I'm too stupid to understand what's really going on here. "Willow deserves the best space in the house. She's been through so much with the divorce and everything, and she needs stability and comfort right now." I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't even raise my voice or let any of the anger I was feeling show on my face. Instead, I did something that apparently caught her completely off guard. I smiled. Not a friendly smile, mind you, but the kind of smile that should have made her nervous if she had half a brain in her head. "Kids," I said gently, turning back to Ava and Dylan while completely ignoring Lorraine's existence. "Go inside and pack your bags. Just the essentials for now, clothes for a few days, toothbrushes, whatever you need to be comfortable tonight. We're going on a little adventure." I watched Lorraine's expression change from smug satisfaction to confusion to something that might have been the beginning of panic. Her smile disappeared completely, and she took a step forward like she was planning to block the doorway or something equally ridiculous. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, and now her voice had lost that confident edge it had just a few seconds ago. She was starting to realize that maybe she'd miscalculated something important, but she wasn't quite sure what it was yet. I kept my voice calm and pleasant, like we were discussing the weather or what to have for dinner. "Leaving," I said simply. "And tomorrow morning, You're going to get a little surprise that I think you'll find very educational." The kids didn't need to be told twice. They jumped up from the steps and headed into the house to grab their stuff, moving faster than I'd seen them move in weeks. Ava even had this little spark in her eyes, like she was finally seeing her old man step up and handle business for once instead of just trying to keep everyone happy all the time. Lorraine was sputtering now, trying to come up with some kind of response that would put her back in control of the situation, but I was already walking away from her and toward my car. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just stop engaging with people who don't deserve your energy. We ended up at the Hampton Inn about 10 minutes away from the house. Nothing fancy, but it was clean and quiet, and most importantly, it was ours for the night. The kids seemed to relax a little bit once we got settled into our adjoining rooms. I ordered pizza from that place they like, the one with the crazy garlic knots that Dylan always goes nuts for, and we spent the evening watching some mindless action movie on HBO. For a few hours, it almost felt normal again, like we were just having an impromptu family adventure instead of fleeing our own home like refugees. But once the kids fell asleep, Dylan sprawled out on one of the double beds like a starfish. Ava curled up under the covers with her phone charging on the nightstand. I couldn't shake this restless energy that was buzzing through my system like I'd drunk about 6 cups of coffee. I kept pacing around that little hotel room, my mind racing with all the different ways I could handle this situation. Part of me wanted to just go back to the house and have it out with Lorraine right then and there, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything in the long run. This wasn't about having a screaming match or making myself feel better by telling her exactly what I thought of her parenting philosophy. No, this was about something much bigger than that. This was about establishing once and for all who was in charge of protecting my children, and what would happen to anyone who thought they could just walk all over them without consequences. I'd been playing nice for way too long, trying to keep the peace and make everyone happy, but all that had gotten me was 2 kids sitting on the front steps crying because their own grandmother had decided they didn't deserve basic respect in their own home. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning on that stiff hotel mattress while my brain worked overtime planning my next move. By 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely and headed down to the lobby for some of that terrible hotel coffee that tastes like it was made with water from a puddle. I sat there in those uncomfortable chairs, watching the sunrise through the big windows and thinking about everything that had led up to this moment. The truth is, I'd been sitting on a secret for the past 5 years, ever since my dad passed away from that heart attack that came out of nowhere and knocked our whole world sideways. When we were going through all his paperwork and legal documents, I discovered something that I'd never told anyone else, not even Shayla. The house, our family home where we'd been living for the past 8 years, had been left exclusively to me in his will. Not to me and Shayla jointly, not to be split between all the kids, just to me. Period. End of story. At the time, I'd made the decision to keep that information to myself because I thought it would just cause unnecessary drama and hurt feelings. Shayla's family was already dealing with their own financial struggles, and I figured there was no point in making them feel like outsiders or guests in what they considered their home too. I wanted everyone to feel comfortable and welcome, like we were all just one big happy family working together to raise our kids and build a good life. But now, sitting in that hotel lobby at dawn, I realized what a massive mistake I'd made by keeping quiet about the ownership situation. By not establishing clear boundaries from the beginning, I'd essentially given Lorraine and the rest of Shayla's family the impression that they had just as much say in how things worked in that house as I did. I'd let them think they were equal partners in decisions that should have been mine to make, especially when it came to my own children's welfare and living arrangements. Early that morning, around 7:30, I drove straight to my office building. The parking garage was practically empty except for a few other early birds who probably couldn't sleep either, and I took the elevator up to the 15th floor where Morrison and Associates had our suite of offices. I used my key card to get in, walked straight to my private office, and opened up the filing cabinet where I keep all my important personal documents. There it was, filed away between my insurance policies and my kids' birth certificates, the original deed to the house, with my name and only my name listed as the legal owner. I pulled it out and spread it across my desk, reading through all that legal language that basically boiled down to one simple fact. I own that house. Not Shayla, not her parents, not anyone else who might have opinions about how it should be run or who deserved to live in which rooms. I took a picture of the deed with my phone and sent it to Malcolm Rodriguez, my buddy from law school who'd ended up specializing in real estate and family law instead of architecture like I did. Malcolm and I had stayed close over the years, and I knew I could trust him to handle this situation with the kind of professional discretion and aggressive competence that the situation called for. My phone buzzed almost immediately with his response. "Holy shit, man. You've been sitting on this for 5 years? We can have eviction papers drawn up and served by tomorrow morning. You want to do this the nice way or the nuclear way?" I typed back without hesitation. "Nuclear. Make it loud. 8:30 a.m. tomorrow, prime breakfast time. I want maximum impact." There's an old saying about revenge being a dish best served cold. And let me tell you, I was about to serve up the coldest plate of reality that Lorraine had ever tasted in her entire life. Malcolm worked his magic overnight, getting all the legal paperwork drawn up with the kind of efficiency that reminded me why I'd kept him on speed dial all these years. The eviction notice was airtight, professional, and absolutely devastating in its simplicity. 30 days to vacate the premises, no negotiations, no appeals, just cold, hard legal facts that would hit them like a sledgehammer to the face. I specifically requested that the process server show up at exactly 8:30 in the morning because I knew that was prime breakfast time at our house. That's when Lorraine held court at the kitchen table like some kind of self-appointed family matriarch, holding her coffee mug like a scepter while she dispensed her wisdom and judgment to anyone unfortunate enough to be within earshot. She loved that morning routine, loved being the center of attention while everyone else scrambled around getting ready for work and school. It was her moment to shine, her daily opportunity to remind everyone exactly who she thought was running the show. Well, today she was going to get a reality check that would knock her right off that imaginary throne she'd been sitting on for way too long. I was at the office by 7:30, trying to focus on some blueprints for a new commercial project, but honestly, I might as well have been staring at a blank wall for all the attention I was paying to my actual work. Every few minutes, I'd check my phone to see what time it was, counting down the minutes until Malcolm's process server would be ringing our doorbell with a special delivery that was going to change everything. At exactly 8:45, my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. The first text came from Shayla, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the screen. "What the hell is this eviction notice? You're being dramatic. We need to talk about this like adults instead of playing these stupid games." Then came Lorraine's message, which was just about what I'd expected from someone who'd spent her entire life believing that throwing tantrums and making demands would get her whatever she wanted. "This is ridiculous, Jordan. We're family, and family doesn't treat each other this way. How could you do something so cruel and heartless to people who've only tried to help you?" The third text was from Harper, my sister-in-law. And this one really got under my skin because of how she tried to make this whole mess about her kid instead of acknowledging what she and her mother had done to mine. Willow's been through enough trauma with the divorce and everything that's happened this year. She deserves comfort and stability, not more chaos and uncertainty. "You're being selfish and vindictive." I read through all 3 messages twice, and you know what struck me the most? Not one of them, not a single goddamn one, bothered to ask how Ava and Dylan were doing. Not one of them showed even the slightest bit of concern for the 2 children who'd been kicked out of their own bedrooms and had their belongings thrown around like garbage. Not one of them seemed to think that maybe, just maybe, my kids deserved some consideration in all of this. That told me everything I needed to know about where their priorities really were, and it confirmed that I was absolutely doing the right thing by drawing a hard line in the sand. These people had shown their true colors, and those colors were ugly as hell. I set my phone aside and tried to get back to work, but it kept buzzing every few minutes with more messages. Shayla sent 3 more texts trying different approaches. First guilt, then anger, then this weird attempt at reasoning that completely ignored the fact that her mother had just traumatized our children. Lorraine sent a long, rambling message about how ungrateful I was and how she'd always known I wasn't good enough for her daughter. Harper chimed in with more stuff about Willow's needs and how I was destroying an innocent child's sense of security. But here's what really got to me. Around 10 o'clock, I got a text from Ava. "Dad, Grandma and Grandpa are running around the house yelling and throwing stuff into boxes. Grandma keeps crying and saying you've lost your mind. Dylan asked me what's happening, but I told him you were just standing up for us finally. That message made me smile for the first time in days. My 13-year-old daughter understood exactly what was happening here, even if the supposed adults in this situation were too wrapped up in their own drama to see the bigger picture. Ava got it. This wasn't about being mean or vindictive or playing games. This was about a father finally putting his foot down and protecting his children from people who thought they could walk all over them without consequences. The rest of the day was a blur of ignored phone calls and increasingly desperate text messages from Shayla's family. They tried every angle they could think of: guilt trips, threats, promises to work things out, even attempts to get other family members involved as mediators. But I wasn't interested in mediating or negotiating or finding some kind of middle ground. The time for compromise had passed the moment they decided my kids belonged in the basement. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in my office trying to pretend I was actually getting some work done when my assistant knocked on my door with this weird look on her face. "Mr. Price," she said, "your wife is here, and she seems upset." That was corporate speak for, "There's a woman in the lobby who looks like she's about to burn this building down and take everyone with her." I told her to send Shayla back to my office, and about 30 seconds later, my wife came storming through that door like a Category 5 hurricane looking for a trailer park to demolish. Her face was red, her hair was all over the place like she'd been running her hands through it, and she was clutching those legal papers in her fists so tight that her knuckles had gone completely white. She slammed the eviction notice down on my desk so hard that my coffee mug jumped about 3 inches in the air, and then she just stood there glaring at me like I'd personally betrayed everything she'd ever believed in. "You're evicting my mother?" she demanded, her voice pitched about 2 octaves higher than normal. "My own mother, Jordan. The woman who raised me and has been nothing but supportive of our family since day one." I leaned back in my chair and looked at her for a long moment, trying to decide how much patience I had left for this conversation. The truth was, I'd been expecting this confrontation ever since I'd given Malcolm the green light to serve those papers. But somehow I'd thought Shayla might come at me with at least a little bit of understanding about why I'd felt like this was necessary. Instead, she seemed genuinely shocked that I'd finally grown a backbone and stood up for our kids. Without saying a word, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the deed to our house. I slid it across the desk toward her, nice and calm, like I was passing her the salt at dinner. "Correction," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "I'm removing trespassers from my house. My house, Shayla. Not our house. Not your mother's house. Not some kind of communal property where everyone gets an equal vote. Mine." She stared down at that piece of paper like it was written in a foreign language she'd never seen before. I watched her eyes scan across the lines, taking in all that legal terminology that basically boiled down to one very simple fact. Jordan Price was the sole owner of the property where we'd been living for the past 8 years. Not Jordan and Shayla Price. Not the whole extended family. Just me. "You can't be serious," she whispered, but I could tell from the way her voice cracked that she was starting to understand exactly how serious I was about this whole situation. She picked up the deed with shaking hands and read through it again, like maybe she'd missed something the first time that would change what it said. "Dead serious," I replied. "The house was left to me when my dad died. Only me. I never put your name on the title, never made it joint property, never gave anyone else any legal claim to it whatsoever. I kept quiet about that for 5 years because I wanted everyone to feel comfortable and welcome, but apparently that was a mistake on my part." She sank down into one of the chairs across from my desk, still clutching that deed like it was going to spontaneously combust in her hands. But we've been living there together all this time. We've been making decisions together, planning renovations together, treating it like our family home. And it is our family home," I said, leaning forward and putting my elbows on the desk. "But when push comes to shove, when someone has to make the final call about who lives there and who doesn't, that someone is me. And I've decided that people who think it's okay to kick my children out of their own bedrooms don't get to live in my house anymore." The color drained out of her face as the full implications of what I was saying finally hit her. "Jordan, please. They're my parents. This is their home too. They've been helping us with the kids, contributing to the household expenses, being part of our family." "Being part of our family?" I interrupted, and I could feel my carefully controlled temper starting to fray around the edges. Is that what you call throwing Ava's art projects in the garbage and making Dylan cry? Is that what you call stripping their bedrooms bare and moving their stuff to the basement like they're some kind of unwanted house guests? She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand to stop her before she could get started. And if they refuse to leave within 30 days, I added, tapping the eviction notice with my finger, they'll be legally forced out by the sheriff's department. With all their belongings on the front lawn and a formal eviction on their record that'll make it damn near impossible for them to rent anywhere decent for the next 7 years. Shayla stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time in our entire relationship. I don't even know who you are right now, she said quietly. The Jordan I married would never do something this cold and calculating to family. The Jordan you married was a pushover who let other people walk all over his kids, I replied. But that guy just got his wake-up call, and he's not coming back. That night, after Shayla left my office looking like someone had just told her the world was flat and gravity was optional, the real psychological warfare began. I was back at the hotel with the kids, helping Dylan with his math homework while Ava worked on some English assignment about analyzing character motivations in literature, which seemed pretty ironic considering what we were all living through at the moment, when my phone started buzzing with what I can only describe as a full-scale guilt assault. First came a video message from Lorraine that Shayla had obviously helped her figure out how to send, because let's be honest, the woman could barely operate the TV remote without a detailed instruction manual. In this video, she was sitting in what used to be our living room, tears streaming down her face like she was auditioning for some daytime soap opera about tragic family betrayals. She was going on and on about how she'd given up her own apartment to help us with the children, how she'd sacrificed her independence and her social life to be there for our family during difficult times, and how she couldn't understand how I could be so heartless and ungrateful after everything she'd done for us. The performance was actually pretty impressive, I'll give her that. She hit all the right emotional notes, the quivering voice, the strategic pauses to wipe away tears, the wounded expression that suggested I'd just kicked a puppy in front of a children's hospital. But here's the thing about manipulation tactics. Once you recognize them for what they are, they lose their power over you pretty quickly. And I'd been watching Lorraine pull this same routine for years whenever she didn't get her way about something. Next came a long, rambling text message from Harper that was basically a masterclass in emotional blackmail disguised as concern for child welfare. She went on for probably 3 paragraphs about how Willow had already been through so much trauma with her parents' messy divorce, how the poor kid was just starting to feel safe and secure in our house, and how my selfish and vindictive actions were going to cause irreparable psychological damage to an innocent 9-year-old who'd done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being born into a broken family. The message ended with this real piece of work. I hope you can sleep at night knowing that you're willing to traumatize a child just to prove some petty point about being the man of the house. Willow keeps asking why Uncle Jordan hates her so much that he wants to throw her out on the street. What am I supposed to tell her? I read that message twice, and both times it made me want to throw my phone against the wall. Not because it made me feel guilty, but because of how perfectly it demonstrated everything that was wrong with this whole situation. Harper was trying to make this about her daughter's feelings while completely ignoring the fact that her mother had just traumatized my children by throwing them out of their own bedrooms. She was acting like Willow was the only kid in this equation who mattered, like Ava and Dylan were just collateral damage in some larger drama that didn't really concern them. But the real kicker came around 9 o'clock when Shayla called me directly, and I could tell from her voice that she'd been crying for hours. "Jordan, please," she said, and she sounded so tired and defeated that for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. They're family. They're my parents. I know Mom can be difficult sometimes, but she means well, and she loves the kids in her own way. Her own way? I repeated, trying to keep my voice down so the kids wouldn't hear me getting worked up. Shayla, her own way involved throwing our children's belongings in the garage like trash and moving them to the basement so her precious granddaughter could have the best rooms in the house. If that's love, then I'd hate to see what it looks like when she actually dislikes someone. You don't understand, Shayla continued. And now she was using that pleading tone that she always pulled out when she was trying to get me to compromise on something I didn't want to compromise on. Mom grew up poor. She never had nice things when she was a kid, and she just wants Willow to have the childhood she never got to have. She's not trying to hurt Ava and Dylan. She just doesn't always think about how her actions affect other people. I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying what I was really thinking, which was that being poor as a kid doesn't give you a free pass to be a selfish asshole as an adult. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried to explain the situation in terms that even Shayla might be able to understand. And what about our kids' childhood? I asked. What about their right to feel safe and valued in their own home? What about their right not to be treated like second-class citizens by their own grandmother? When do their feelings start to matter in this equation? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. But then she said, "Can't we all just sit down and work this out like a family? Can't we find some kind of compromise that makes everyone happy?" That's when I knew for sure that she still didn't get it. She was still thinking about this like it was some kind of negotiation where everyone gets to walk away with something they want. She didn't understand that some lines, once they're crossed, can't be uncrossed with a family meeting and some group hugs. Over the next few days, our hotel room became like command central for what felt like the weirdest family drama I'd ever been part of. The kids and I had settled into this strange routine where we'd grab breakfast from the continental buffet downstairs. They'd head off to school like nothing major was happening, and I'd spend my days juggling work calls with updates from Malcolm about the legal situation while fielding increasingly desperate messages from Shayla's family. Lorraine and her husband Warren had apparently kicked their packing operation into high gear, but they were making sure everyone knew just how traumatic and unfair the whole process was for them. Every few hours, I'd get reports from neighbors or mutual friends about how they were loading boxes into their car while loudly discussing what a heartless monster I'd become. Warren, who'd always been the quiet type who just went along with whatever Lorraine decided, was now apparently telling anyone who'd listened that I'd lost my damn mind and was destroying the family over some petty power trip. The funny thing was, their whole victim act was actually working in my favor because it was forcing Shayla to see exactly what kind of people her parents really were when they didn't get their way. She'd moved in with them temporarily at some extended stay place across town, and apparently living in close quarters with her mother's full-time drama queen routine was starting to wear pretty thin on her nerves. Malcolm kept me updated on all the legal angles, making sure every single detail was airtight and that there was absolutely no wiggle room for them to try to challenge the eviction in court. The beautiful thing about property law, he told me during one of our check-in calls, is that it's pretty black and white. You own the house, you get to decide who lives there, end of story. They can cry and complain all they want, but the law doesn't care about their feelings. Meanwhile, the kids were handling everything way better than I'd expected. Ava had turned into this fierce little protector of her brother, making sure he understood that none of this was his fault and that sometimes adults had to make hard decisions to keep families safe. Dylan was still confused about a lot of the details, but he seemed to understand that his dad was fighting for him and his sister, and that was enough to keep him from getting too anxious about the whole situation. But the real breakthrough came on Thursday evening when I was sitting in the hotel lobby answering some work emails while the kids watched a movie upstairs. I looked up from my laptop and saw Lorraine walking through the front doors like she owned the place, scanning the lobby until her eyes landed on me. She marched over to where I was sitting with this expression on her face that suggested she was about to deliver some kind of ultimatum that would put me in my place once and for all. "You think you've won?" she said, not even bothering with any kind of greeting or small talk. She plopped herself down in the chair across from me like we were old friends having a casual chat, instead of two people who were basically at war with each other. "You think throwing us out of that house is going to solve your problems and make you feel like a big man?" I saved my work and closed my laptop, giving her my full attention because I had a feeling this conversation was going to be worth remembering. "I think I've established some boundaries that should have been established a long time ago," I said calmly. "And I think my children are sleeping better at night knowing that their father isn't going to let anyone treat them like second-class citizens in their own home." She leaned forward in her chair, and I could see that same manipulative gleam in her eyes that I'd been watching her use on people for years. "Those children need stability, Jordan. They need family around them, people who love them and want what's best for them. You're destroying that support system over some ridiculous pride issue that doesn't even matter in the long run." "What matters in the long run," I replied, "is that Ava and Dylan grow up knowing that their father will always put their needs first, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable for other people." What matters is that they never have to wonder whether they're valued and respected in their own family. Lorraine's expression shifted from confident manipulation to something that looked almost like panic. "You've lost your family," she said, and her voice had taken on this sharp edge that suggested she was running out of ammunition for this particular battle. "Shayla barely knows who you are anymore. The kids are going to grow up thinking their father is some kind of cold, heartless dictator who cares more about winning than about keeping the family together." I looked her straight in the eye and smiled. Not a mean smile, not a triumphant smile, just the kind of calm, confident smile that comes from knowing you're absolutely doing the right thing. "No, Lorraine," I said quietly. "I protected mine. There's a difference between keeping a family together and letting toxic people destroy it from the inside out." She sat there for a moment, apparently trying to come up with some kind of comeback that would salvage her position, but I could see that she was finally starting to realize that her usual tactics weren't going to work on me anymore. I wasn't the same guy who used to cave in whenever she turned up the emotional pressure. It was Friday morning, exactly 1 week after this whole mess had started, when Shayla finally reached out to me with something other than guilt trips and demands for family meetings. Instead of the usual angry texts or tearful phone calls, I got a simple message that just said, "Can we meet? Just you and me. I think I need to understand what's really happening here." We agreed to meet at Murphy's Diner, this little hole-in-the-wall place about halfway between my office and the extended stay hotel where she'd been camping out with her parents. It was one of those classic American diners with red vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone Han while they poured coffee that could strip paint off a car. We'd been there a few times over the years when we wanted to get away from the house and just talk without any distractions or interruptions. When I walked in around noon, she was already sitting in a corner booth, staring out the window like she was watching for something that might never come. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and she had this defeated expression that I'd never seen on her face before, not even during the worst fights we'd had over the years. I slid into the booth across from her and ordered coffee from the waitress, who seemed to sense that this wasn't going to be a cheerful lunch conversation and gave us some space to talk. For a few minutes, we just sat there in awkward silence, both of us trying to figure out where to start with a conversation that felt like it could either save our marriage or destroy it completely. "I didn't realize how much I've let them run things," she finally said, her voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her properly. "I've been living with Mom and Dad for the past week, and it's like seeing them through completely different eyes. Everything has to be about them. Everything has to go their way, and if it doesn't, then someone else is always to blame." I nodded, but didn't say anything, because I could tell she was working up to something important, and I didn't want to interrupt her train of thought. This was the first time since this whole situation started that she'd shown any sign of actually understanding what had been going on in our house for months. "Mom spent 2 hours yesterday crying about how ungrateful you are," Shayla continued, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself up from the inside out. "And when I asked her if she thought maybe she should have talked to us before moving the kids' stuff, she looked at me like I was crazy. She said she was doing what was best for everyone, and that you were just being stubborn and selfish." "And what do you think?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral even though I was really hoping she was finally starting to see the truth about her mother's behavior. She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her coffee like it might have the answers to all of life's complicated questions floating around in there. "I think I've been so afraid of making waves that I forgot my job is to protect our kids, not to keep everyone else happy," she said. "I think I've been letting Mom make decisions that should have been ours to make, and I think our children have been paying the price for my cowardice." That was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, and I felt some of the anger I'd been carrying around start to ease up just a little bit. "It's not too late," I told her, "but things have to change. Really change. Not just go back to the way they were with everyone pretending nothing happened." She looked up at me then, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "I want to come home," she whispered. "I want to be with you and the kids, and I want to start acting like their mother instead of like some kind of referee who's trying to keep everyone from fighting." "You can come home," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But it's going to be under new rules. Our kids always come first, no matter what. No more letting your parents make decisions about how we raise them, or where they sleep, or what they deserve. No more choosing your mother's feelings over our children's well-being. She squeezed my hand and nodded. I understand. And Jordan, I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took me this long to see what was really happening. And I'm sorry our kids had to go through all of this because I was too weak to stand up to my own mother. I could see that she meant it, really meant it. And for the first time in a week, I started to believe that maybe we could actually fix this mess and come out stronger on the other side. The kids are going to need to see that you're serious about this, I told her. They're going to need to know that you're choosing them, not just saying you're choosing them. I know, she said, and I will. Every single day if I have to. We sat there for another hour, talking through all the details of how things were going to work going forward, what the boundaries would be with her parents, and how we were going to help the kids process everything that had happened. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like we were actually on the same team again. Moving day arrived exactly 30 days after Malcolm had served those eviction papers, and I'll be damned if it wasn't one of the most satisfying mornings of my entire adult life. I woke up early that Saturday, made coffee in the hotel room's little machine that barely worked, and watched the sun rise through our window while the kids slept peacefully in their beds. Today was the day we were finally going home. Really going home, not just to a house where other people got to make the rules and my children were treated like unwanted guests. Shayla had moved back in with us at the hotel 3 days earlier, and I could tell she was nervous about how this whole thing was going to play out. She'd been walking on eggshells around me ever since our conversation at the diner, trying to prove that she was serious about putting our kids first, but I could see in her eyes that she was still worried about the fallout from her family. Part of her was probably hoping that somehow, at the last minute, everyone would kiss and make up, and we could all go back to pretending that nothing had happened. But I wasn't interested in pretending anymore. Some bridges, once they're burned, need to stay burned, and this was definitely one of those situations. Around 10 o'clock, I drove over to the house to make sure everything was going according to plan. Malcolm had warned me that sometimes people try to pull last-minute stunts on moving day, claiming they need more time, refusing to leave, calling the police, and making up stories about illegal evictions. So I wanted to be there to oversee the whole process and make sure there weren't any dramatic scenes that might traumatize the kids. When I pulled into the driveway, Warren was loading the last few boxes into the back of their beat-up Honda Accord, moving slowly like every step was causing him physical pain. The guy looked like he'd aged about 10 years in the past month, and honestly, I almost felt sorry for him. Warren had never been the problem. He was just married to the problem and too weak to stand up to her when she got one of her crazy ideas. Lorraine was standing on the front porch, supervising the whole operation like some kind of exiled queen, watching her palace being ransacked by barbarians. She was wearing this black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which I guess in a way she was. The funeral of her ability to control my family and make decisions about my children's lives. I got out of my car and walked up the driveway, nodding politely to Warren as he struggled with a particularly heavy box. Need any help with that? I asked, because despite everything that had happened, I wasn't going to be a complete asshole to a 68-year-old man who was just trying to get through a difficult day. Warren looked surprised by the offer, like he'd expected me to stand there gloating or making sarcastic comments about how they'd brought this on themselves. No, I got it, he said quietly. Just a few more trips, and we'll be out of your hair. Lorraine, on the other hand, couldn't resist getting in one last shot. She came down the porch steps with her chin held high, and this look on her face like she was about to deliver some profound wisdom that would make me realize the error of my ways. You're cold, she said, stopping about 3 feet away from me and crossing her arms over her chest. This is still family, Jordan. No matter what legal papers you wave around, no matter how much power you think you have, we're still family, and family is supposed to stick together through thick and thin. I looked at her for a long moment, taking in that self-righteous expression and that tone of voice that suggested she still didn't understand why any of this had happened. Even now, even after 30 days of being forced to face the consequences of her actions, she still thought she was the victim in this situation. Real family doesn't throw children into basements to make room for someone else, I replied calmly. Real family doesn't treat kids like they're disposable when something better comes along. Real family protects the most vulnerable members, not the ones who cry the loudest. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand to stop her. You had your chance to be real family, Lorraine. You chose to be something else instead. Now you get to live with that choice. Warren finished loading the last box and came over to where we were standing. "We're ready to go," he said to his wife, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. This whole month had taken a toll on him too, and I got the sense that he was actually relieved to be done with all the drama and ready to move on to whatever came next. They got in their car without any dramatic goodbyes or tearful speeches, and I watched them drive away from my house for the last time. No hugs, no promises to stay in touch, no suggestions that maybe we could work things out in the future. Just a quiet ending to a chapter that had gone on way too long. That afternoon, I picked up the kids from their friend's house where they'd been hanging out during the move, and we all drove home together as a family. Walking back into our house that evening felt like stepping into a completely different world, even though technically nothing had changed except for who was living there. The same furniture was in the same places, the same family photos were hanging on the walls, and the same creaky floorboard in the hallway still made that annoying sound when you stepped on it just the wrong way. But somehow, everything felt lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let fresh air blow through rooms that had been stuffy and oppressive for way too long. Ava and Dylan raced upstairs immediately to check out their bedrooms, and I could hear them laughing and shouting to each other as they rediscovered spaces that had been stripped away from them just a month ago. Ava had brought a bag full of new posters she'd been saving up to buy, some indie bands I'd never heard of, and a few motivational quotes that were probably going to drive me crazy with their teenage wisdom. And she was already planning where everything was going to go on her freshly painted walls. Dylan had found his old Lego collection in the boxes we'd stored in the garage, and he was dumping everything out on his bedroom floor like he was reuniting with old friends he hadn't seen in years. "Dad," he called down the hallway, "can we set up my train table again? I want to build that city I was working on before everything got messed up." "Absolutely, buddy," I called back, and I could hear the pure joy in his voice as he started planning his elaborate construction projects. That kid had been carrying around so much anxiety for the past month, worried that maybe this whole situation was somehow his fault or that maybe he wasn't good enough to deserve his own space. Now he was back to being a normal 11-year-old who just wanted to build cool stuff and show it off to anyone who'd pay attention. Shayla was moving through the house more quietly, running her hands along surfaces and looking around like she was seeing everything for the first time. I could tell she was still processing what had happened over the past month, still trying to figure out how she'd let things get so far out of control that her own husband had to legally evict her parents to protect their children. She kept starting to say something and then stopping herself, like she wasn't sure what words could possibly make any of this better. "It feels different," she finally said as we stood in the kitchen watching the kids blast music from upstairs while they reclaimed their territories. "I know it's the same house, but it feels like ours now instead of like we were just guests in someone else's space." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. For months, maybe even years, we'd all been walking on eggshells in our own home, constantly trying to avoid conflicts or situations that might upset Lorraine or challenge her authority. We'd been living according to her rules, her schedule, her priorities, and somehow we'd all just accepted that as normal. It had taken this nuclear option to remind us what it felt like to be a family that made its own decisions and put its own children first. We ordered pizza for dinner, the good stuff from Tony's, not the budget chain place that Lorraine always insisted on because she thought spending money on fancy food was wasteful. And we ate it in the living room while watching a movie that the kids actually wanted to see. No negotiations, no compromises, no lengthy discussions about what was appropriate or educational or worthwhile. Just a family enjoying each other's company without having to check with anyone else about whether their choices were acceptable. Later that night, after we'd helped the kids get settled back into their own beds and their own rooms, I went through my usual routine of making sure all the doors were locked and the lights were turned off. But when I got to Dylan's room for the final goodnight check, he was still wide awake, staring up at the ceiling with this thoughtful expression that looked way too serious for a kid his age. "Dad," he said as I sat down on the edge of his bed, "are they going to hate us now? Grandma and Grandpa, I mean. Are they going to be mad at us forever because we made them move out?" It was one of those questions that hits you right in the chest because it shows you just how much your kids understand about complex adult situations, even when you think you're protecting them from the worst of it. Dylan had been watching and listening and trying to make sense of everything that had happened, and now he was worried that somehow he and his sister were responsible for breaking up the family. I took a deep breath and tried to find words that would be honest, but not too heavy for an 11-year-old to carry around. No, buddy, I said, reaching over to mess up his hair the way that always made him giggle. They're not going to hate us. They might be confused for a while, and they might not understand why things had to change, but that's not your problem to worry about. That's grown-up stuff that me and Mom have to handle. But what if they never want to see us again? He asked, and I could hear the real fear in his voice. Despite everything that had happened, despite the way they'd treated him and his sister, he still loved his grandparents and wanted them to be part of his life. Then that would be their choice, I told him. But it wouldn't be because of anything you or Ava did wrong. Sometimes adults make bad decisions, and when they do, they have to face the consequences for those decisions. You guys didn't do anything except exist and deserve to be treated with respect in your own home. He thought about that for a minute, processing the idea that adults could make mistakes that had nothing to do with whether children were good or bad. Are you sure we did the right thing? He asked. I looked around his room, at the superhero posters back on the walls, at the bookshelf full of stories he loved, at the baseball trophies lined up on his dresser, at all the evidence of a kid who was valued and cherished and given space to be himself. Yeah, buddy, I said. I'm sure. Sometimes being a good man means being firm with people who aren't treating your family right. Sometimes being a great father means protecting your children from people who should have been protecting them instead. Even if it makes some people mad? Even if it makes some people mad? I confirmed. Because you know what? Your job isn't to make everyone else happy. Your job is to be a good kid, work hard in school, be kind to your sister, and know that your mom and dad will always have your back no matter what. That seemed to satisfy him, because he finally smiled and settled down under his covers. Thanks, Dad, he said sleepily. I love you. I love you too, kiddo. Get some sleep. I turned off his light and headed toward my own bedroom, but I stopped for a moment in the hallway to look at myself in the big mirror that hung there between the kids' rooms. The guy staring back at me looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd just finished a job that had needed doing for a long time. I didn't see a man who'd started a war or destroyed a family or acted out of spite or cruelty. I saw a father who had finally stopped being quiet for the sake of peace. I saw someone who'd learned the difference between keeping everyone happy and actually protecting the people who mattered most. I saw a man who discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries that some people aren't gonna like. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I know now about the consequences and the fallout and the relationships that would never be the same, I'd do it louder. I'd do it sooner. I'd do it with even more conviction, because my children deserve a father who puts their well-being above everyone else's comfort, including his own. That's what real love looks like sometimes. Not the easy, comfortable kind that avoids conflict and keeps the peace, but the hard kind that stands up and fights when fighting is what's needed. The kind that says, not my kids, and means it, no matter who gets upset about it.